Morkborg is a modern RPG. It was developed by Pell Nielsen and Johan Nohr, and it was published in 2020, I think, February 2020 by Free League Publishing. It's kind of described as a doom metal fantasy RPG. So it very much has this atmosphere of doom metal or grimdark. This is definitely not the fantasy with elves and orcs and dwarves and centaurs and this kind of thing. This is something very dark, and this is noticeable as soon as you see the book itself. It's quite a small book, but as you'll see, the aesthetic is very particular and very striking. Lots of vivid colours, lots of different colour text. Sometimes the text is at different angles. This is not your conventional RPG book where everything is nicely laid out in tables. And I quite like this, I have to say. It reminded me of some of the old punk fanzines from back in the day. In fact, a group of us did produce a fanzine at one time called The Outsider. So it's very much that sort of a DIY or low-tech aesthetic. So that's our first difference from Rolemaster. And the second difference is in terms of the rules. The Morkborg rules, oh, by the way, Morkborg means dark fault. More about that later. But the rules fit on one page. That's basically it. It's all quite straightforward. And even when we see our character sheet, we see that we've only got 4 characteristics: agility, presence, toughness, and strength. And you roll for each of those. If you get a high score in those, you get a bonus. If you get a low score, then you get a minus. And this plus or minus is applied to your dice rolls. It's D20. So say you've got a strength bonus of +2 and you have to do some strength-based feat or task. The DM will say that has a difficulty of 12. In other words, you have to roll 12 or more on the D20 and you'll get your strength bonus added in. That's pretty much it. So between those 4 attributes, that covers pretty much every action you want to take. Now, as well as those characteristics, you have some other things that you roll for during your character creation, which took about 30 minutes or so. It was pretty quick. Then there was a little bit more set up before we actually got into the scenario, just buying equipment, that sort of thing. But none of these extra things that you roll for are particularly good, or if they are good, they come with a downside as well. So I think my character, I rolled up a couple of things and I got, he had a very suspicious nature, was one thing. And the second thing was his hands were covered in sores. Yes, I told you it was grim, and this is one of the more minor attributes that you can develop. I mean, there were other things that are a little bit more fun as well. So one character rolled up, he had 2 pet monkeys who, while they adored him and always stayed with him, wouldn't actually obey any of his orders or do anything that he asked them to. So that was a lot of fun. Now, unlike Rolemaster, the setting here is very specific. It's a post-apocalyptic world, but it was a magical apocalypse. So everything's twisted round, time is distorted, everything's a little bit inside out. There's lots of really strange things roaming around, and there's no character classes as such. And the characters you'll play, well, they're not your typical paladins or heroic rangers with jutting jaws and all that kind of stuff. Uh, we were basically a group of peasants who were members of a cult that got roped in to do an investigation. And in order to do that investigation, we were bumped up to knights, only because all the other knights were killed. But even the knights, everything is very dark and very twisted. So it's probable that your character will be indulging in blood sacrifice, for example, and this sort of thing. That mood carries over into the adventures and the scenarios themselves. Now, I've only played in one scenario that Elliot ran last week down at Bedford, but it was full of human size maggots, lots of undead, lots of things with too many arms. Everything was very gruesome. There were rooms full of bones, rooms full of blood, all this sort of stuff. So, yeah, you can see where like this death metal idea comes in. but also it reminded me of some films as well. Things like Peter Jackson's Bad Taste or Army of the Dead, I think the third Evil Dead film, that kind of splatterfest film where, yeah, it is very gory, but there's a real sort of vein of dark humour running through it as well. So, in that sense, while it was very gruesome, it was also fun and funny to play as well. You know, it's the sort of thing where something horrible happens to another one of your party and everyone turns around and laughs at them. It's that kind of vibe. So that's Morkborg, a very quick look at Morkborg. If you like that sort of thing, you'll like this sort of thing. The plus side for me was it was very easy to get into. And I think the interesting thing here is we've got two RPGs, one 1980, one 2020, so 40 years apart. And in a sense, one thing that Morkborg does, one thing that I really got from it was it took me back to those very early D&D days, those real old school games of, not a lot of thought of campaigns or anything else, but we're in there and we're killing stuff and we're looting places and we're getting treasure and we're finding these odd things. One of the things in this was a character finds one thing and from then on he always has to talk in rhyme, Again, very reminiscent of some of those old D&D games. So in terms of that and in terms of the atmosphere, I really enjoyed it. I'd also say it seems to have an extremely good sort of backup on the internet. The developers are very active in putting out new material. There's a lot of players putting out their own stuff. So there seems to be a really thriving and active Morkborg community. And I believe they may even have put out some other rules like sci-fi based, which I'd certainly be interested in taking a look at. On the downside, I'm not sure that this is a game that you'd run as a campaign, maybe more of a one-off or a couple of sessions. Whereas with the Rollmaster, we're sort of settling in to this campaign. It's a nice, steady, slow burn as we get into it. I think with Morkborg, your prospects of character development might be severely limited. I mean, just as an example, in the particular scenario we did, it was required for at least one of the party to cut their own arm off as a blood sacrifice in order to complete the quest. I mean, there's not many times you can do that, right? So, in that sense, although it has a very rich world behind it, I'm not sure there's that character development idea. But I may be wrong because I've only just played one scenario. So perhaps there are other games or other scenarios that go more into that side of it. So there we go then. That's my recent experience with two fantasy RPGs. As I said, something old, something new, something very gruesome, but interesting for me again how that new one harkens back to the old. And, let's face it, at the end of the day, it's the same as with war games rules or anything you're doing. You find the set that suits you for the sort of game you want to play. Morkborg, a little bit more quick fun, one shot, great for an afternoon or an evening's play, really fun and enjoyable. But I will look at it further to see maybe there is that aspect to develop things a little more. So that's my experience as a player. Now, I've not run any RPGs for quite some time. The last one I did run was a very long, extended Vampire Masquerade campaign that I think ran over a couple of years. And if you've played that game, you'll know that that's very much about character and atmosphere and plot. That's the sort of approach I think I prefer now. If I was running a game, I'd want to have less rules in a sense and work much more on character and drama and atmosphere. I did run Call of Cthulhu for quite some time as well, and we did start to develop it in that way. Our early Call of Cthulhu was quite D&D-ish in a sense, a little bit, modern D&D with deep ones, but it did develop over time, as of course the game itself developed and the scenarios developed. And I think our high point for Call of Cthulhu was when I ran a modern day campaign. It was set in the 1970s in London, and I wouldn't say I threw all the rules out, but I stripped a lot of the rules back and just really went on percentages. You know, roll the percentage dice. What's your skill in the particular thing you're trying to achieve? let's weigh up how difficult or how easy that might be, and we'll give that a pass or a fail. I found that led to a much more fluid game, and also to a game that really encouraged character development. Now, that might sound odd in Call of Cthulhu, of course, where everyone dies and everyone goes mad. But again, it depends what type of game you want to play. I seem to remember we had quite a lot of Dreamlands stuff in that as well, which was very interesting. Almost going into a fantasy setting, but still with its roots, of course, in the Cthulhu mythos, because there's no escape, right? Anyhow, that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed that brief look at those two games. I recommend both of them highly. Do let me know if you've played them. Do let me know your thoughts and your views. I'd also be interested to hear any recommendations for other RPGs. It's something I do want to get back into running at some point. I'm not sure what genre or what system yet. I did always enjoy Traveller. That sci-fi setting was very nice. But we'll see. I'm always open to new ideas. Okay, thanks again for watching. As always, please do like, share, and subscribe. Please do keep those comments and suggestions coming in, and be lucky with your dice rolls.